then looked toward the door Audrey had used and said, with infuriating casualness, "She's very polished." Claire's brows lifted. "That sounds loaded." "It's not." "It is." Iris looked back at her. "I'm making an observation." Claire crossed one arm over her waist and studied her the way she did when she was deciding whether Iris was bluffing or simply refusing to show all her cards. "Were you jealous?" Iris laughed softly, almost offended. "Claire, that's not an answer." "No," Iris agreed. "It isn't." Claire pushed off the desk and came closer. "Not enough to trap. Enough to shift the air." Iris held her ground, which meant, naturally, that Claire stopped even closer. "Audrey doesn't matter," Claire said quietly. Iris's expression barely changed. "I know." Claire searched her face. "I do," Iris repeated. "That's not why I came." That was the truth, and because it was the truth, Claire heard it. Something in her posture loosened another fraction. Then, more softly, "Why did you come?" Iris looked at her for a second, then answered in the same calm tone she'd walked in with. "Because I didn't like the idea of your old life showing up in your office before I did." That landed. Harder than either of them expected, judging by the way Claire's eyes changed. Iris went on before either of them could make it larger than necessary. "You don't need rescuing." "I know that." She lifted one shoulder. "But if women from your mother's lunch schedule are going to start appearing in glass towers, I'd rather be ahead of the trend." Claire actually laughed. Quietly, but enough. It transformed her face in exactly the way Iris had become weak for. "Well," Claire said, "that is the least romantic version of loyalty I've ever heard." Iris's gaze dropped briefly to Claire's mouth, then back up. "And yet you understood it." "Oh, perfectly." The office door opened before the silence between them could become something much more difficult to explain to building staff. Dana leaned in, took one look at the distance between them, and said, "Well, this seems charged." Neither woman looked at her. Dana smiled wider. "Wonderful." Claire turned just enough to give her the sort of look that had unsettled men in boardrooms and did absolutely nothing to Dana. "What?" Dana stepped inside with complete innocence. "I just wanted to make sure no one had to be escorted out by security. It's useful to know these things." Iris leaned lightly against the side of Claire's desk and said, "You were hoping for more." Dana considered. "Not professionally." Claire reached for her glass of water at last, then thought better of it and didn't drink. Dana's gaze flicked toward the door Audrey had used. "She'd gone." "Yes." Dana nodded. "Good." Then, because no one in this entire story respected the concept of leaving a tense moment untouched, she looked at Iris and asked, "So, how is she?" Iris turned her head slightly, as if giving the matter serious thought. "Expensive." Dana's mouth flattened in appreciation. "That's fair." "Also polished." "Still fair." "Also," Iris said, voice staying smooth, "she looks like the kind of woman who has spent a long time being told she belongs in rooms she didn't earn." Dana put one hand over her heart. "Oh, I like you so much." Claire looked at Iris with an expression that was dangerously close to open admiration, and therefore had to be ignored for everyone's safety. Dana noticed that too and wisely chose not to comment. Instead, she looked between them and said, "Since I've now successfully delivered tension, context, and transport, I'm going back to the gallery before June decides I've abandoned her to candles and feelings." Candles and feelings got a short laugh out of Iris. Dana pointed between the two of them. "Don't start anything in this office that I'll have to hear about from reception." Claire's face was almost perfectly composed again. "Get out." Dana smiled. Delighted. Then she was gone. The office quieted once more. This time the silence felt different. Less interrupted. More aware. Claire came around the desk properly and stopped in front of Iris again, close enough that the city behind the glass fell away into soft geometry and useless height. Iris looked up at her. Claire looked down at her with that steady, infuriating attention that made even simple sentences feel overlit. "You should have called first," Claire said. Iris's brow lifted. "Would that have improved your mood?" Claire's mouth curved. "No." "Exactly." Claire glanced briefly toward the office door, then back at Iris. "You touched my arm in front of her on purpose." Iris considered denying it, then didn't. "Yes." Claire's eyes darkened by one precise shade. Not enough for anyone else to name. More than enough for Iris. "Good," Claire said quietly. There was that word again. Low. Controlled. Entirely too effective. Iris felt it in her stomach before she trusted her voice enough to answer, so instead she did the more dangerous thing and touched the front of Claire's jacket once, smoothing nothing, just proving to both of them that she could. Claire went very still. "I should go back," Iris said softly. Claire did not move. "Probably." Neither of them stepped away. The city gleamed beyond the glass. Somewhere below, people were hurrying between meetings and lunches and lives that still made sense in traditional ways. Here, in Claire Donovan's office, Iris stood very close to the woman she had first met across a pool table and thought, not for the first time, that the most absurd path available had also turned out to be the clearest. Claire touched the side of her wrist. A small, private answer to the hand Iris had left on her sleeve. "When exactly," Claire asked, "did you decide to become terrifyingly calm?" Iris smiled. "Probably around the moment I realized being your wife had made me much more interesting." That got her a real reaction. Brief, helpless, gone too fast. Claire leaned in just enough that her next words felt lower than the room. "You continue to be a serious workplace issue." Iris's breath caught once, though she was annoyed to give him that much. "Then it's a good thing I'm leaving." Claire's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back up. "Yes," she said. But neither of them moved for 1 second longer than was remotely wise. And by the time Iris finally stepped back and headed for the door, both of them knew Audrey Banks had already made one fatal error. She had arrived too late to a life that no longer needed her approval to feel real. By the time the gallery lights were lowered that evening, the place no longer looked like a workspace. It looked like a decision. Nothing about it was traditional. That was the point. The front windows had been softened from the inside, so the city beyond them became a wash of evening gold and blurred headlights instead of a distraction. Chairs had been placed in 2 quiet rows facing the back wall, where Iris had chosen one large, abstract piece in deep blue, charcoal, and gold to hang alone. Candles, battery-powered, under June's strict anti-fire regime, glowed along the pedestals in clean lines. The flowers were white, but not too bridal. The music was low, barely there. The whole room felt less like a wedding venue and more like someone had taken the exact center of Iris Quinn's taste and made it intimate enough to stand inside. Claire arrived before the parents did. Iris was still in the back office changing, and June stood at the front desk with a clipboard and the expression of a woman who had been dragged into romance by force and intended to bill everyone emotionally afterward. Dana came in 3 minutes later, took one look around, and gave a low approving hum. "Well," she said, "this is beautiful in a way that would make at least 3 of Claire's mother's friends uncomfortable." June looked up from the clipboard. "Good." Dana smiled. "You're enjoying this too much." June didn't blink. "I'm enjoying control. The romance is incidental." That got the smallest laugh out of Claire. Dana noticed immediately. "You look tense." Claire adjusted the cuff of her jacket. "I'm not tense." Dana gave her a long look. Then, dryly, "You're staring at the back office like it contains either the love of your life or a bomb." Claire said nothing. Dana's smile sharpened. "Ah, so both." Before Claire could answer, the front door opened again and Tori swept into the gallery with the energy of a woman who had been emotionally waiting for this invitation since the night of the pool bet. She stopped just inside, looked around, pressed both hands to her chest, and said, "Oh, thank God. This one looks legal." June looked up. "That is an incredibly low bar." Tori pointed at her. "You. I like." June's expression remained severe. "People keep saying that to me as if it's useful." Tori crossed the room, kissed Iris's mother on the cheek as she came in behind her, then went straight to Claire and looked her up and down with shameless appraisal. "You clean up well for your second wedding." Claire, to her credit, almost smiled. "Thank you." Tori folded her arms. "Still a little terrifying." "Also thank you." Dana laughed softly into her drink. The room filled in layers after that. Iris's parents arrived together, her mother carrying too many emotions and her father carrying flowers he clearly believed were someone else's responsibility. Claire's father came in quieter than before, more observant than defensive now. Claire's mother arrived in dark silk, beautiful and composed, and still carrying enough old instinct in her posture to suggest she was trying not to assess the room as though it were a private event she might have planned better herself. And with her, of course, came Audrey Banks. Claire saw her the second the door opened and felt the same small internal tightening she had in the office, though this time she was ready for it. Audrey was in black tonight. Sleek, restrained, perfect. Less like she was attending a wedding and more like she had chosen to be elegant in the vicinity of one. She came in beside Claire's mother, not clinging, not hovering, just close enough to imply comfort in places where comfort had historically belonged to people like her. Claire's attention sharpened at once. Dana noticed. Naturally. Tori, who knew absolutely nothing about Audrey except what she could infer from one glance and years of human survival, leaned toward Dana and whispered, "Who's the expensive ex?" Dana murmured back, "Worse. Symbolism." Tori blinked. "Oh, gross." Claire almost laughed. Almost. Then she looked toward the back office. Still closed. No Iris yet. Audrey moved through the room with the effortless grace of a woman who did not need to own space loudly in order to occupy it completely. She greeted Claire's father. She exchanged a few polished words with Iris's mother. She even glanced at the art with what looked like real interest, which was somehow more irritating than if she had been dismissive. Claire's mother, meanwhile, seemed determined to act as if Audrey's presence were a neutral event, which, by the standards of family diplomacy, meant it was very much not. Dana drifted to Claire's side with a glass of water and handed it over. "You are," Dana said under her breath, "being very disciplined." Claire took the glass. "It's useful." Claire looked at her. "What?" Dana's mouth curved. "Nothing. I'm just interested to see how long Audrey manages to stay under Iris's skin before Iris decides to become extremely calm. She won't make a scene." "I know." Dana's eyes lifted toward the back office. "That's why I'm excited." The door opened before Claire could answer. The room did not fall silent. Not entirely. It just changed direction. Iris stepped out in the dark green dress Claire had chosen for her, the silk catching the low gallery light in a way that made every breath Claire took immediately less reliable. Her dark blonde waves had been pinned back on one side and left loose on the other. Nothing about the look was fussy. It was elegant without trying, sharp without hardening her. Beautiful in the exact way Iris always was when she had fully decided not to make herself easier for anyone else. Claire forgot Audrey completely for one dangerous second. Then Audrey turned too. And there it was. Recognition. Not of defeat, not yet, but of the fact that whatever story she had once represented for Claire, it had no hope of competing with the woman currently walking across a gallery floor that had been rearranged into a vow. Iris saw Audrey immediately. Claire knew because their eyes met for the briefest instant, and instead of flinching, Iris went still. Not cold. Not angry. Just still in the way Claire now understood very well. This was the version of Iris Quinn that scared other people and did terrible things to Claire's pulse. Iris crossed the room without hurry, stopping first beside Claire, not touching her immediately, but near enough that the air itself drew a line. Tori came forward and hugged her fast. "You look insane." Iris kissed her cheek. "That's not a compliment." "It is from me." June, from the desk, muttered. "Everyone in this story needs stricter vocabulary." That got soft laughter out of the room and broke the surface tension just enough. Then Audrey stepped closer. Not too close. Never too close. But enough to bring the room into focus again. "Iris," she said. Iris turned. Audrey's smile was perfectly measured. "You look lovely." "Thank you." Audrey glanced once toward Claire, then back to Iris. "I have to admit, I'm still impressed you managed to move all of this so quickly. It's bold." There were 5 different ways to hear that sentence. Every woman in the room heard the right one. Claire set her water down. Dana went still near the wall. Tori's brows lifted. June visibly paused in the act of adjusting a seating card. Iris, however, just looked at Audrey for a beat. Then she reached for Claire's hand. Not abruptly. Not like she needed rescue. Like she was picking up something that belonged naturally in hers. Claire's breath caught once, quietly enough that only Iris would have heard it. Iris held Audrey's gaze and said, calm as polished glass, "You seem confused, so let me help. She's my wife." Silence. Not loud silence. Sharp silence. The kind that didn't need to last long to be complete. Audrey's expression held perfectly for a fraction too long. Claire did not move. Could not have moved if the building were on fire. Iris's fingers tightened once around her hand. Then, with the same maddening composure, Iris added, "So whatever version of Claire you expected to find here, you're late." That one landed everywhere. On Audrey. On Claire's mother. On Dana. who looked like she needed a private room to enjoy herself properly. On Tori, who mouthed "oh my god" to absolutely no one. But most of all, it landed on Claire. Because Audrey had come in representing an old expectation, an old convenience, an old social logic Claire had spent years outgrowing. And Iris. Iris had just looked directly at that whole world and declined to be intimidated by any part of it. Audrey recovered beautifully. Of course she did. A small, knowing smile touched her mouth. I see. Iris inclined her head. Good. For 1 second, Audrey looked from Iris to Claire, and something very close to actual understanding moved through her expression. Not approval. Not resentment. Recognition. Then she stepped back. Not banished. Not humiliated. Just put in her proper place. Dana, behind her wine glass, murmured under her breath. Well, that was lethal. Tori whispered back. I'm obsessed with her. June from the desk said without looking up. Take a number. Claire still hadn't taken her eyes off Iris. Iris finally turned toward her. There was no triumph in her face. That was the part that nearly undid Claire on the spot. No pettiness. No visible jealousy. No performance. Just certainty. As if standing beside Claire and making that clear to the room had been the easiest thing in the world. Claire's mother spoke first, because of course she did. We should begin, she said, and for once there was no edge in it. Only precision. Perhaps even, if one were feeling generous, a kind of surrender to the inevitability of what she had just witnessed. Claire looked at Iris for 1 second longer. Then, very quietly, so only Iris heard it. Come with me. Iris's brows lifted very slightly. Claire's jaw tightened once. Now. Iris saw whatever was in her face and, to her immense credit, didn't smile. Not yet. She only squeezed Claire's hand once and let Claire lead her toward the back office while the room behind them rearranged itself into patience, curiosity, and the unmistakable feeling that something had just happened no one present would forget. The back office was dim compared to the gallery. Not dark, just quieter, softer. The overhead lights had been left low, and the sounds from the main room reached them only in fragments now. Chairs shifting, someone clearing a throat, the faint murmur of voices trying not to sound curious. Claire shut the door behind them, then turned. For 1 suspended second, neither of them moved. Iris stood with one hand still lightly wrapped around the edge of her dress, as if she'd only just remembered she'd been pulled out of a room full of parents, friends, old expectations, and one extremely polished ghost from Claire's former life. Claire looked at her and felt the full force of the evening hit all at once. Not when Audrey arrived. Not when her mother brought her in. Not even when the room had gone still. No. Here. With Iris standing in front of her in that green dress, calm as ever, as if publicly cutting through years of inherited social pressure had been no more difficult than choosing a wine that wasn't embarrassing. Claire took 1 step toward her. Then another. Do you have any idea what you just did to me? Iris didn't blink. Didn't soften. Didn't retreat. Didn't pretend not to know. Yes. 1 word. Quiet. Certain. Devastating. Claire let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh and absolutely wasn't one. Of course you do. Iris's mouth moved slightly at that, but she said nothing. Claire stopped close enough to feel the warmth of her without touching. Her hands opened once at her sides, then closed again, as though even now, with the room outside waiting for them, control still insisted on being invited to stay. It was useless. Claire looked at her and thought of Audrey in the gallery, her mother at Audrey's shoulder, the entire old architecture of her life standing there in expensive shoes, still foolish enough to imagine it knew what belonged where. And then Iris, without a tremor in her voice, without performance, without fear, had taken Claire's hand and ended the matter. Not for Audrey. For Claire. Because she had seen what that room meant. What Audrey represented. What kind of pressure could still enter through old doors wearing good manners. And Iris had stood there and made it clear that Claire would not face any of it alone. Claire looked at her and very quietly said, You stood there like you'd always belonged beside me. Iris's eyes softened, just slightly. I do. That was it. That was the final undoing. Claire stepped in, one hand rising at last to Iris's waist, the other finding the side of her face with a kind of helpless precision that made the gesture feel more intimate than urgency ever could. Iris. But there was no other sentence worth saying first anymore. Not after weeks. Not after the contract. Not after the gallery. Not after this. Claire held her gaze and said, with no shield left around it at all, I love you. The room went silent inside Iris's face. Not blank. Not shocked. Still, as if something in her had been braced so long that hearing it at last had not broken her open so much as let her exhale. Claire's thumb moved once against her cheek, and for the first time all evening, some tiny piece of fear slipped through the calm. What if? Then Iris smiled. Small at first. Warm. Almost unbearably tender. And said, just as quietly, I love you too. Claire closed her eyes for half a beat. Not because she doubted it. Because hearing it almost hurt. In the best possible way. In the irreversible way. When she opened her eyes again, Iris was still there, still looking at her like she knew exactly what she'd done and had chosen every part of it. That look made the air between them feel suddenly much thinner. Claire leaned in, slow enough to give Iris every chance to move away. Iris did the opposite. She rose slightly into her, fingers sliding into the front of Claire's jacket, and kissed her before the distance was fully gone. The kiss landed deep. Not frantic. Not reckless. Not like jealousy. Not like the first wild swing of possession. Not like the night Claire had nearly come undone in the penthouse because Daniel had touched the wrong woman at the wrong time. This was worse. This was slower. The kind of kiss that carried everything they had not said in public and made it impossible to leave any of it outside the room. Claire's hand tightened at Iris's waist. Iris answered with a quiet breath against her mouth that nearly knocked the rest of Claire's discipline loose on the spot. She kissed Iris again, harder now, her other hand sliding from Iris's cheek to the back of her neck, keeping her there, feeling the exact moment Iris melted into it. God. The room outside the office might as well have disappeared entirely. There was only this. Iris's mouth warm and willing under hers. The rustle of silk when Claire drew her closer. The sharp, sweet ache of finally saying the thing and being loved back with no contract, no dare, no convenient excuse left between them. Iris's fingers found Claire's hair, ruining what little order remained in it, and Claire made a low, involuntary sound that seemed to please Iris far too much. When the kiss broke, it was only long enough for breath. Iris looked at her with lips parted, eyes bright, steady even now. You really waited until right now? Claire's mouth brushed hers once in answer before she said, You told Audrey Banks I was your wife in front of both sets of parents. Iris's hand stayed curled in her jacket. That bothered you? Claire kissed the corner of her mouth. No. Then the line of her jaw. Quite the opposite. Iris let out a soft, helpless laugh that vanished almost immediately when Claire's mouth found the side of her throat and lingered there. The reaction was instant. Iris's breath caught. Her hand tightened. Her head tipped back just enough to give Claire a little more room and absolutely no peace. Claire paused there for one dangerous second, one hand firm at Iris's waist, feeling her pulse under warm skin, and thought dimly that if anyone knocked right now she might have them professionally removed from the city. I was trying, Claire murmured against her skin, to behave. Iris's voice came softer than before. And now, Claire lifted her head and looked at her. Now I think you've had enough opportunities to make me patient. That did something to Iris's whole face. Not shock. Not nervousness. A slow, deeply satisfied kind of heat, as if this version of Claire, less controlled, less polished, more obviously affected, was exactly what she had hoped to uncover by walking into that office and then standing beside her in the gallery without flinching. Dangerous woman. Iris touched Claire's cheek once, thumb brushing lightly over the corner of her mouth. You're very beautiful when you lose your composure. Claire stared at her for one beat, then laughed once, quietly, disbelievingly, and kissed her again because there was nothing else to do with that sentence except surrender to it. This time Iris went up on her toes to meet her, one arm sliding around Claire's neck, the other still holding the front of her jacket. Claire backed her one slow step until the edge of the office table met the back of Iris's thighs. The contact made Iris inhale. Claire's hand moved over the line of her waist, lower along her back, then up again, steady and certain, all that careful control turned intimate instead of distant. Iris's fingers tightened at her nape. When Claire kissed her throat again, slower this time, Iris whispered her name like it hurt a little. That nearly ended whatever remained of Claire's restraint. She lifted her head, eyes dark on Iris's face. You keep doing that. What? Saying my name like you know exactly what happens to me when you do. Iris smiled, breathless now in a way she would undoubtedly deny later. Maybe I do. Claire kissed her before that could become another weapon in the wrong hands. The office table creaked softly against the movement. Outside, somewhere beyond the door, a chair shifted in the gallery, and one of their mothers was probably pretending not to wonder what was taking so long. Too bad. Claire's hand slid up Iris's back again and settled there, broad and warm and impossible to misunderstand. Iris kissed her like a woman who had already made up her mind and had no intention of revisiting the decision. When they finally broke apart, both of them stayed very close. Claire rested her forehead against Iris's. Iris's hand stayed at the back of her neck. Neither seemed particularly interested in pretending they had merely come back here for air. Claire's voice when it came was lower now. Softer too. You can't do something like that to me in a room full of people and expect me not to react. Iris's lips brushed hers once. I was counting on it. Claire smiled then. The real one. Ruined around the edges in the best possible way. Menace. Your menace. There it was again. That impossible, perfect answer to things Claire hadn't even known she was asking for until Iris began giving them to her. Claire kissed her once more, slower now, letting it settle instead of burn. When it broke, Iris let out a breath and looked at her with that steady warmth that still had the power to make the rest of the room feel irrelevant. We should go back. Claire's hands stayed where they were for one beat longer. Probably. Neither moved. Iris smiled. You say that like you're not going to. Claire looked at her mouth and then, with real effort, stepped back just enough to remain vaguely respectable. I'm considering my options. That's your rich person version of stalling. That's my wife's very annoying read on me. Iris smoothed the front of Claire's jacket once, then reached up and fixed one lock of Claire's hair with a tenderness so casually intimate Claire almost pulled her right back in and canceled the ceremony out of principle. Instead, Claire took her hand and kissed the inside of her wrist once. A private echo. A promise. A thank you she was not trusting herself to phrase aloud yet. Iris's eyes softened. Then, with one final look that made the whole office feel charged again, she said, Come on, Claire. And the way she said her name that time, warm, certain, already home, was enough to make Claire follow her back toward the gallery with no remaining illusion that she had ever truly been the more dangerous woman in this marriage. When Claire and Iris stepped back into the gallery, the room changed again. Not because anyone had heard what happened in the back office. No one had. At least not clearly. But there was something unmistakably different in the air around them now. Something settled, bright, and dangerous in the quiet way only certainty could be dangerous. Claire's hair was almost perfectly restored except for one stubborn strand near her temple. Iris's lipstick was still intact enough to pass, though only barely, and there was a softness in her face that had not been there when she walked out with Audrey Banks still standing in the room. Dana saw it first. Of course she did. Her eyes moved once from Claire to Iris and back again, and then she looked down into her glass as if protecting the rest of them from the full force of her satisfaction. Tori, meanwhile, leaned toward June and whispered, not nearly quietly enough, "Oh, they absolutely went in there and made out." June didn't look away from the candles she was pretending to straighten. I refuse to speculate in a workplace. You are absolutely speculating in a workplace. Yes, June said, but with dignity. That got a laugh out of Iris's mother, which seemed to relax the room by half a degree. Claire's mother took her place in the front row with the composed posture of a woman who had decided that, if she could not control the event, she would at least attend it with proper shoulders. Claire's father stood beside her for a second, then sat. Iris's parents settled on the other side, visibly moved already. Audrey remained near the back, not inserted into the center anymore, simply present enough to witness what she had misread. June crossed to the small pedestal at the front and cleared her throat once. No one had appointed her master of ceremonies. That had never stopped her from being the most efficient person in any room. Well, she said, everyone is here. The batteries and the candles are holding. No one has cried yet in a way that causes delay. So unless somebody plans to flee, we should begin. Tori put a hand to her chest. I adore her. June ignored that with the strength of a saint and nodded toward the front. Claire and Iris moved into place beneath the large abstract painting on the back wall. The whole gallery seemed to narrow around them, not because the room was small, but because every line in it now led toward the same point. The soft candle glow. The flowers. The city dim beyond the covered windows. The two women standing in the middle of it, not facing an officiant, not facing a legal table, just facing each other. Iris held a cream envelope in her hand. Claire recognized it instantly. The copy of the contract. There was a slight stir in the room as Iris lifted it. Not fear, not concern, recognition. That paper had become part of the mythology now, whether any of them liked it or not. The dare, the signatures, the stupid, life-changing absurdity of it. The contract that had once forced two stubborn women not to run from the first difficulty and had somehow ended up watching them outgrow it. Iris looked at Claire once, then at the room. "This got us started," she said, holding up the envelope. "And for a while, maybe we needed it. We needed something ridiculous enough and binding enough to keep us from pretending we could just walk away before this became real." That earned a few quiet smiles. Even Claire's mother's mouth softened, though only slightly. Iris glanced back at Claire and went on, "But it doesn't get to speak for us anymore." She opened the envelope and pulled out the folded pages. Claire watched her fingers on the paper and felt something unexpectedly tight move through her chest. Iris stepped closer and held out half the pages after tearing them once, cleanly. Claire took them. The room went very quiet. Then, without looking away from Iris, Claire tore her half too. The sound was small, sharp, final. Iris dropped her pieces into the empty silver frame box June had placed on the pedestal. Claire did the same. For 1 second, they both looked down at the torn contract inside that box. A relic now, nothing more than paper that had once been braver than either of them and no longer needed to be. Dana murmured softly from the side, "That's annoyingly effective." June didn't take her eyes off the front of the room. "I know." Iris reached for Claire's hands and held them between them. No script. No officiant. No one else to hide behind. Just Claire. That was enough. Claire spoke first. Not because she had planned to. Because the words were already there. "When we got married the first time," she said, "I thought I was making a decision I could live up to." Iris's expression changed instantly. Softer, warmer. The way it always did when Claire stopped trying to be impressive and started being exact. Claire kept going. "I thought I was being reckless in a way I could still control." A faint smile touched her mouth. Which, in hindsight, says more about me than it should. That got a quiet laugh. Claire held Iris's gaze. "What I didn't know then was that the hardest part wouldn't be the marriage. It would be being known this well and having no interest left in hiding from it." The room had become still enough that Claire could hear Iris's mother breathing. "Good. Let them hear it." Claire's fingers tightened once around Iris's. "You did not make yourself smaller to fit into my life," she said. "You did not let my world define you before it knew your name. You made room for me in yours instead. You made honesty feel less frightening than control. And you kept choosing me, publicly, privately, stubbornly, long after we had every reasonable excuse to call this a mistake." Iris's eyes were bright now. Claire went on, voice lower but steadier for it. "So I'm not standing here because of a contract. I'm standing here because my life is sharper, warmer, truer, and far less lonely with you in it. I choose you now with no condition attached, no deadline, no dare, and no paper left to blame. Just because you are the woman I want beside me when the room gets difficult, when the city gets quiet, and when life turns ordinary enough to matter." Silence. The kind that hurt in the best way. Iris laughed once under her breath and blinked too fast. Tori wiped at one eye without shame. Dana looked determinately at the ceiling. Claire's mother lowered her gaze, and for one brief second the line of her mouth suggested she had lost a private argument with her own composure. Iris squeezed Claire's hands. "That was deeply unfair," she murmured. A quiet ripple of laughter. Then Iris drew one breath and answered. "When we got married the first time," she said, "I honestly thought I was walking into a disaster I'd survive purely out of spite." That got a bigger laugh. Even Audrey smiled at that. Iris smiled too, but it didn't last long. Her face settled into something more open than Claire had seen in public before. Not softer. Just fully unguarded in a way that made Claire's heartbeat noticeably less useful. "I thought maybe I'd get a ridiculous story out of it," Iris said. "Maybe a little chaos. Maybe one glamorous regret." Her eyes held Claire's. "What I didn't expect was to find a woman who would look at me like I was worth understanding. A woman who meant what she said even when it would have been easier not to." A woman who could make room for me in a life that was already full and somehow make it feel like she'd been waiting for exactly my kind of trouble the whole time. Claire exhaled very softly. Iris's thumbs moved over the backs of her hands. You made me want things I wasn't planning to want, Iris said. Home. Permanence. The kind of love that doesn't need an exit strategy hidden in the drawer. Her voice dropped, but carried anyway. I choose you, Claire Donovan. Not because of how this started, but because of what it became when we stopped running. I choose you because you're the person I still reach for when everything gets loud. And because somehow being your wife feels less like something I agreed to and more like the clearest decision I've ever made. Claire did not trust herself to speak. So she kissed her. Slowly. Completely. In front of everyone. Not out of triumph. Not to silence the room. Not to prove anything. Because it was the only answer big enough. Iris came into it with a quiet breath and one hand lifting to the back of Claire's neck, and the whole gallery stayed still around them as if no one wanted to be the first person rude enough to break the moment. When the kiss ended, they stayed close. Forehead to forehead for one brief second. Iris smiled first. There, she whispered. That one was ours. Claire laughed softly, helplessly. Good. That got another small wave of laughter through the room and finally let everyone breathe again. Claire's father stood first, walked forward, and kissed Claire's cheek before doing the same to Iris's with more care than awkwardness this time. That, he said, was considerably better than the chapel. Low bar, Claire said. He almost smiled. Still, Iris's father hugged her next, then Claire, and muttered something about not understanding modern romance but respecting commitment, which was, by his standards, practically poetry. Iris's mother cried openly and blamed the lighting. Tori hugged them both and said, I need everyone here to remember I supported this from the first unhinged moment. June, from near the front desk, said, That is not how I remember your behavior. Tori looked at her. Don't ruin my brand. Dana approached with the measured calm of a woman who had already decided to weaponize memory later if necessary. She kissed Iris's cheek, then Claire's, and said, Well, this is inconvenient. Claire lifted a brow. For whom? For me, Dana said. I was enjoying the fake marriage angle. Reality has much less plausible deniability. Iris laughed. Claire, unfortunately, found herself smiling again. Then Audrey stepped forward. Not into the middle of them. Not dramatically. Just enough to be clear. She looked first at Claire, then at Iris. For 1 second, Claire braced automatically. Not for a fight, but for some elegant residue of doubt, some final line meant to preserve Audrey's position in the mythology of Claire's old world. It didn't come. Audrey's gaze settled on Iris, and with complete honesty she said, I was wrong. The room quieted again, though less sharply this time. Iris watched her carefully. Audrey went on, I thought this was something temporary that happened to Claire. I didn't understand it was something she had chosen her way into. She looked briefly toward Claire, then back to Iris. And I certainly didn't understand that she'd already been chosen back. Claire said nothing. There was nothing to improve in that sentence. Iris held Audrey's gaze for a beat, then inclined her head once. Well, she said softly, now you do. Audrey's mouth moved in what might almost have been a laugh. Yes, she said. Now I do. Then she stepped back without another word, and whatever old role she had been carrying into the room finally dissolved into something smaller and harmless, just another person who had misread the shape of Claire Donovan's future. And if you've ever wanted to watch a story that began with a reckless dare turn into something so real even the wrong witness has to admit it, subscribe now. Because Claire and Iris had finally given themselves the one thing their first wedding never could. A choice made slowly, clearly, and with no excuse left not to mean it. By the time the last of the parents had gone, the candles were still glowing. The flowers had started to droop very slightly at the edges, and the gallery had settled into that beautiful after-event quiet where every chair seemed to remember who had been sitting in it. Claire stood near the back wall with her jacket draped over one arm while Iris spoke to Tori for another minute near the door. June was stacking programs by the front desk with the air of someone trying not to look at all moved and failing only around the eyes. Dana drifted toward her carrying 2 glasses of wine she had not been authorized to distribute. June looked up, saw Dana, and narrowed her eyes on instinct. Dana handed her 1 glass anyway. This is either a reward or a trap, June said. Can it be both? June accepted the glass. You continue to be alarmingly comfortable here. Dana smiled and rested one elbow on the desk. That's because you keep letting me in. June took a sip. That is a deeply manipulative interpretation of events. Dana looked at her for one long second, then said, exactly as promised. Dinner tomorrow? June paused. Not because she hadn't expected it. Because she had. She set the glass down, folded one arm across her waist, and gave Dana the kind of look that should have been more defensive than it actually was. This is not a date. Dana's smile widened. Not smug, just delighted by the resistance. That would depend entirely on how charming I decide to be. June stared at her, then picked up the glass again. You're exhausting. Dana's gaze softened by half a degree. That's not a no. June looked away first. It's one dinner. Good. June made a face. Do not use that word at me like you invented satisfaction. Dana laughed quietly. Noted. Across the room, Tori finally hugged Iris goodbye one last time and left with a promise to tell the story very inaccurately and with extreme emotion. Claire watched Iris lock the front door behind her, then turn and lean back against it for a second, breathing out slowly into the quiet. The gallery was empty now. Just the four of them. June noticed where Claire was looking and straightened. You two should go. Iris looked over. That sounded like an order. It was. Dana lifted her glass toward June. She's very bossy for someone who runs a front desk. June gave her a deadpan look over the rim of her wine. And yet somehow the building survives. Claire almost smiled and crossed the room toward Iris. June, seeing that movement, pointed toward the back office. No. Both women looked at her. June folded her arms. Absolutely not. Not again. I just finished making this place respectable. Iris's face went pink at exactly the speed Claire expected and appreciated. Dana laughed into her wine. See? This is why I like her. June ignored that and looked at Iris. Take your wife home. The sentence settled over the room with a comfortable ease that still had the power to land. Iris glanced toward Claire and failed, for one dangerous second, to hide how much she liked hearing it. Claire stepped in beside her and took her hand. Yes, Claire said. That seems wise. June nodded once as if transferring responsibility. Good night. Dana touched Iris's shoulder lightly on her way out. Try to be less radiant tomorrow. It's inconsiderate. Iris laughed. Then Dana kissed Claire's cheek and added, quietly enough that only Claire heard, You look better like this. Claire looked at her for one beat. Then said, just as quietly, I know. Dana smiled and left. June locked the inner office, turned off 2 lights, and ushered them out with all the emotional grace of a woman herding beloved idiots away from valuable art. Outside, the city had cooled into silver and black. Claire's car was waiting at the curb, and for once neither of them spoke on the drive home. They didn't need to. Iris kept one hand in Claire's across the center console almost the entire way, and Claire let her. The silence wasn't empty. It was full in the exact right places. At the penthouse, shoes came off by the entry. Claire set down her keys. Iris loosened the back of her dress and stood in the warm low light of the living room looking suddenly tired in the softest possible way. Claire crossed to her and touched the side of her face. All right. Iris looked at her, then smiled. Yes. This time there was no hesitation in it. No irony. No half-kept distance. Just yes. Claire kissed her once, slowly, and let the rest of the evening dissolve from there. Not into urgency, not into the kind of heat that needed witnesses or conflict to sharpen it, but into the quiet intimacy of 2 women who had already done the dramatic part and now had the far more dangerous task of being happy. Later, much later, with the city quiet beyond the windows and the last of the evening still lingering softly between them, Claire and Iris fell asleep tangled together in the kind of peace neither of them would have trusted at the beginning. The ceremony was over, the old contract was gone, and nothing was holding them there now except the simplest truth either of them had ever chosen. When the night ended and the world fell silent, they still wanted the same thing. They wanted each other.